Hello there. What is going on, everyone? Big news to talk about with Asmodee and Embracer Group. There has been a big shakeup, a lot of changes happening with Asmodee's parent company, the Embracer Group, and a big restructuring that we're going to talk about in today's video. I'm going to just jump right into it. Over the past 24 hours, a ton of news has been coming out about this big change, this big shakeup, and basically it involves Embracer Group, who purchased Asmodee a few years ago, part of a big deal, and it's one of the big restructurings that changed Asmodee to appear more profitable, and it's one of those things that led to Fantasy Flight Miniatures games moving over to Atomic Mass Games, as well as lots of layoffs. And usually when stuff like this happens, it usually ends up being bad for everybody that's not some type of big wig corporate executive. So the actual developers that work on these games and the people that bring you these games end up being very, very affected by this, and usually not in a great way. When a company like Embracer Group is having massive financial problems like they apparently are right now, it usually doesn't bode well for the people who are just doing their jobs every day and bringing us great games. They're usually the ones to suffer the most. So it looks like something like that may be happening again with Asmodee, although a little bit differently this time. It doesn't appear that they're currently trying to sell Asmodee, although that certainly could be something that ends up happening, although it definitely doesn't seem to be the case right now because of what we do know. Embracer Group has a lot of debt. And they're passing off a massive chunk of that debt to Asmodee, which is actually currently a profitable company, a profitable division of them. Asmodee is doing over $1 billion a year. They're doing great. They're saddling up Asmodee with about 3 years worth of profits that have to be paid back in 18 months. So they have to basically, in order for them not to go under, it sounds like Asmodee is going to have to triple their profits virtually overnight, which generally is a very bad thing. A lot of pressure to put on a company. And if that ends, that's perhaps an oversimplification of all the finer details and the timelines that they've been given. But according to all the news that's out there, I'll put links to some of the different articles that are talking about this in more detail, because a lot of it is talking about these other two companies that Embracer Group is splitting up into, Coffee Stain and Friends and Middle Earth Enterprises and Friends, which are apparently only placeholder names, like made-up names, for basically the different parts of Embracer Group that are going to focus more on video games and independent games and AAA games and things like that, whereas Asmodee is still going to be doing their board game thing. And that's, there's definitely a lot of different ways that this could end up landing. One takeaway on this is that Asmodee being broken up into a separate company, it could allow them more freedom to do more things, and potentially, with somewhat less oversight, might allow them to potentially triple that profit more natively. However, if they could triple their profit that easily, I think they would probably have done that already. The big fear is that when you put that much of a demand on a company, you're kind of setting them up for failure. There's an analogy that comes to mind of, suppose I were to, transfer all of my debt over to my spouse and then file for divorce and then somehow get out of the relationship, absolving myself of all debt because of some legal loophole. It seems like something like that is happening, and the big fear is that Embracer Group is trying to set up Asmodee for failure in hopes that they can absolve themselves of billions of dollars worth of debt. And if that is the case, that could spell bad news for Asmodee. However, that's just what they're announcing right now. This obviously isn't going to take effect immediately. It's not like this debt is due immediately, and there's still a lot of time for things like this to shake out. However, I do have some thoughts on how I think that big news like this is going to likely affect the games that we all know and love that come from Asmodee. I think you're going to see a slowdown on games that are less profitable and an increase on the games that are profitable. Anytime you're asking somebody to triple their profits, you're probably going to see things like layoffs. This is probably one of those things that led to the removal of Worlds. If Worlds was as expensive as it was on companies like Atomic Mass Games in having those world tournaments, then it makes perfectly good sense why that would be one of the first things that was cut. Unfortunately, that could have wider impacts on organized play in the future, especially if you're trying to get something organized. I think you'll still have organized play that'll be community run, but I don't think you're going to see too much stuff that's getting particularly heavy support from Asmodee companies like Atomic Mass Games and Fantasy Flight Games and things like that. I think games that end up being more profitable, I wouldn't be surprised if games like Star Wars Unlimited end up not being affected as much, because again, a card game isn't super expensive to print. It's just card stock, as opposed to something like X-Wing or Armada, which are pre-assembled, fully painted miniatures that MSRP'd for only $50 years and years ago, and so as a result, have a relatively low price point compared to what they would cost if they were to come out today. I do expect another round of price increases. We did just recently see a big advertised price lock-in just recently out of Asmodee, basically saying, look, these companies can't advertise our games for lower than a certain amount of price. I didn't do a video on it because it really wasn't big news to me. They've done stuff like that before. Going back in time, once upon a time, they didn't have this agreement, and it meant that if an X-Wing expansion cost $20, sometimes a retailer could list it for only $9.99, and in some cases you would see like clearance of like, oh, this new X-Wing expansion only $5.99 or $4.99, or clearance $3.99 for a $20 product, and eventually, Fantasy Flight Games at the time put a big stop and said, look, there's a limits to how much of a sale you can advertise. Now, if you have your clearance bin in your store, or your ding and dent bin in your store, that's one thing, but you can't advertise it. Because that brings down the perceived value of our product and all of that stuff. It makes sense. I can understand that. Even if you're selling it at a loss, there's still. But basically, they basically revisited that argument, and you really can't advertise stuff very cheap at all now. And so, now granted, it can still be sold, and you can augment certain things like that with like, hey, okay, you buy from our store, you have to buy it at full MSRP, but you'll earn points in our reward system. And so there's other ways of offsetting the savings and transferring the savings to different places without diminishing the retail MSRP and value of the product. And that's certainly one way to look at increasing profits, is by reducing the amount of sales people can put on those profits. It keeps your prices higher. There's things like that. That doesn't really affect how much money Asmodee makes, but that affects the perceived value of the product, which means that then if they have to raise prices, it's not seen as such a big deal, because a game that costs $100 that goes up to $120 won't seem that big of a deal, but it seemed like a lot bigger of a deal if the game was being advertised for only $50 by a store, and all of a sudden you're seeing it jump to $120 and things like that. So it has more of a public perception impact, but those eventually translate long term into profits. Well, I also expect there to be a big renewed focus on the games that are most profitable. As for Star Wars miniatures games, I think this is probably not great news for folks who are hoping to see new ships come out for X-Wing and Armada, those ships that are probably the most expensive to produce and to get painted and pre-assembled and clipped off of the the sprues and stuff, and all of the factory assembly and painting that has to happen to get those made for us. I think those are, frankly, to be profitable. I've thought this for a long time, that when a Legion expansion costs $50, like Range Troopers, for example, and then an Armada expansion that's already been clipped and pre-assembled and pre-painted ends up costing less than that. It's granted, I know the amount of plastic isn't the same, but the plastic isn't that expensive. The amount of work that goes into it and the production that goes into it is a bigger part of it. And so I think in order for games like X-Wing and Armada to be as profitable as Legion and Marvel Crisis Protocol and Star Wars Shatterpoint, and games that are on a sprue, they'd have to cost at least double, if not triple, what they cost now. And at that price point, people won't be able to buy as many to make them profitable. So they'd have to be selling a lot and then also be selling for 2 or 3 times as much. Now, that's just loose speculation from me. And I think it's just unreasonable to expect people to buy that much new stuff. So that's my guess. This is now, granted, nothing was talked about as far as product lines or any announcements to these games. This is really just some speculation on ways it could roll out. Then again, it could be a totally different rollout situation. They very well may say, okay, X-Wing and Armada, folks, we are doing those ships, but they're going to have to be on a sprue now. It's the only way to do it. And here's a new plan moving forward. We might see ships come out on a sprue. It could be a very good thing because it might mean new ships. It might mean we'd have to clip them out and paint them again. But if that happens, it'd be a really fun time for me because I like building and painting ships. And it gives me more content that I can put out for you guys with like, hey, have you been an Armada or X-Wing player for a long time and don't know how to build these ships? I'll have tutorials and guides and all that kind of stuff. So I'm getting really far ahead with the speculation here on what that could mean. Because, again, this is where my brain lives. I love those type of games. I love spaceships. I love big spaceship battles. And so, I always wonder if they're going to do them on a sprue. How's that going to work? How would that work for X-Wing with, like, the B-Wings and the really tiny moving parts? How would that work? Because I'm sure it would still work, but it would be really interesting, right? I feel like Armada would be easier. You don't have moving parts in Armada, and you have, like, bigger ships that could have, like, maybe a Home 1 is only like 2 parts. Maybe it's just a top and a bottom, or maybe the engines are a third part or something like that. They just don't seem like they'd be overly complex to me until you get into the really big ships like the Super Star Destroyer, which might be rather complex. They actually had to use screws and that and stuff like that. So could be really interesting. Could you imagine having to assemble like a Super Star Destroyer or really big ships? That would be something. That would be something. I don't know if they're going to end up doing that. I think, more than likely we'll see focus on games like Star Wars Legion, which are listed on many reports as one of the most profitable games that Asmodee has right now. And I think it's a really good thing if you're a Star Wars Legion fan, as I think that means Legion is probably one of the safest games that Asmodee currently has. And if they're one of the most profitable companies in all of Embracer Group, and one of their most profitable games is Star Wars Legion, then that's probably a pretty good thing. Now, what exactly that means for the future of Legion and those reprints that are scheduled, I think they're probably still coming. I think that if you can get away with doing a reprint for a game, doing more Stormtroopers, I think it's got probably a pretty high profit margin for something like that. Because while, yes, you still have to make a new sculpt and you have to get molds for it done, you'd have to do that for any new product. But in the case of reprinting old product, you don't have to do play testing with that. You don't have to do game development, unless, of course, you're making significant changes. But for reprints, usually you're not making significant changes. Usually for a reprint, you're just literally reprinting something that's already been designed, already been tested, already been balanced, already been, had its card art assets done. You're just reprinting the plastic and, coming up with a new sculpt there. And you still get to sell it. And since it'll be new hard plastic, brand new sculpt, it might even be at a higher price point. So that could end up being very good things for Asmodee moving forward. We already know Atomic Mass Games has a big plan to get those, basically every soft plastic release from Star Wars Legion reprinted into the new hard plastic, with even some hard plastic results like General Grievous also receiving a reprint. There could be a whole lot of new Legion product on the way that a lot of it may not have required that much development time at all, which is probably pretty smart, if you ask me. From a business sense perspective, very smart. From what players want perspective, probably also very smart. I know I have been in the camp of wanting, and this was a plan for, even go back to the FFG days, they eventually wanted to do all these in hard plastic. I wanted better Stormtroopers. I wanted better Rebel Troopers. I especially want to see the Rebel Troopers. The Rebel Troopers were probably my least favorite model in all of Star Wars Legion. A large reason for that is how poorly I painted them when they came out. So, this could mean a lot of a huge variety of different things for our Star Wars tabletop games, as well as the various board games that Asmodee has. I do think it puts so much pressure on Asmodee and all of Asmodee's sub companies, Fantasy Flight and Atomic Mass Games and all of these other companies under Asmodee that are making games like Ticket to Ride and Catan and Splendor and all of these. I think a lot of these companies would like to make new games, and they're probably going to have the pressure to say, no, we need another version of Splendor. We need Star Wars Splendor. We've got the Star Wars license, and Splendor's a high seller. Let's do another one of those. And I don't even know if there is a Star Wars Splendor in the works. I bet you it will be announced within the next year, if not. But you see a lot of reskinning of popular games. There's a reason there's like 1,000 different Ticket to Rides, because it's an incredibly popular game. And it's a good game too. I enjoy it. It's one of the few games my wife likes to play with me too. It's a cool. It's good. The whole family can play that game. It's a nice gateway game, getting away from like the traditional Monopoly into the slightly more modern era of tabletop games. And so, great game for good reason. But instead of getting new games, you're going to see probably a lot more reskins, a lot more safe purchases that don't, or safe projects that don't require as much risk and as much brand new development time. I think you're going to see a return to a lot of familiar things, which isn't a completely terrible thing, because it could mean that, hey, I really like this game. I wish there was a variant of it. I really love Star Wars Rebellion. I wish they would do either another expansion for that or a second edition. I think you could see this is maybe the push for expansions to popular games that have already been well received. Maybe another expansion for Star Wars Outer Rim. Maybe another expansions for Star Wars the deck building game. Some powerhouses that Fantasy Flight Games has put out. I've heard rumors of reskinnings of the old StarCraft board game, and which had already been reskinned under 40K, and then they lost that license, and so. I expect them to use their licensed content a little bit more. I mean, they're paying a lot for those licenses, and games like games with Marvel and Star Wars on them, and those, they usually tend to sell pretty well. They tend to be pretty popular. We'll have to see if this just means an influx of really cool new games and stuff for us, or if it means that some games that we're really wanting more stuff from cease to get that attention. I don't know, and it's definitely cause for us to keep our eyes open and see what happens. Of course, I'll be bringing you all the news as it comes out. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Big thanks to all my patrons. You guys are amazing and help make this whole channel possible. I will talk to you later. May the Force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes, and always wash your socks.